get ready before life happens. The podcast helping you navigate life's what ifs.
Welcome to Get Ready Before Life Happens. I'm your host, Tony Stewart. Today I'm joined by Greg Barnsdale, death doula and author of Do Not Ignore Your Mortality. Greg, welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your origin story and how did it lead you to focusing on end-of-life planning?
Well, Tony, thank you for having me on your podcast. I appreciate it. Actually, out of high school, I didn't have enough physics to become a helicopter pilot. So my plan B was to become an undertaker. And I went to a relatively small high school. I think I was only the second student out of that high school to enter the funeral industry. And my parents thought it was rather weird that I wanted to do this, but it was my guidance counselor who actually suggested it.
Interesting is, because you're right. Most people don't have that as a goal. So, why did your guidance counselor suggest it? I mean, what was the reasoning? Because it's not an occupation I think most people even think of as a possible occupation.
Well, you're right, and unless it's something that someone is used to from as a youngster because their family were in it, such as in the show 6 Feet Under, that television series of about 15 years ago, which was my favorite, by the way. I don't know if you had seen it, but as I said, my family were not in it, and they thought it was rather strange initially that I wanted to do this, but it was because I had completed a questionnaire with my guidance counselor. And I was a quiet-natured kid. And for some reason, she just suggested it. And I ended up pursuing that field. And I really enjoyed it. But actually, what I had seen rather quickly was the fact that so many people were just, the survivors were poorly prepared for what was taking place regarding the death in their family.
Yeah, well, and that's something everybody in the financial services industry or just in life in general can relate to is that unpreparedness is, somebody passes away, you're sorting through their paperwork, you're trying to figure out what their final wishes are, organizing services and all that thing. And, it's oftentimes a real jumble and a lot of guesswork. So, let's address it directly. What is end of life planning?
Well, it's basically just planning ahead to be prepared, Tony, for all kinds of things that could happen. And ultimately we all know that we will die at some point, but we have no idea what tomorrow holds and what is coming our way, whether it be a heart attack or a brain tumor or a car accident. Anything could be around the corner. And I'm a prime example of that. 2 months after I published my little book to help people and inspire them to lean into this planning while minds are clear, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor myself. And that's why it's leading actually still today. You can see the cranial radiation mask on the shelf here behind me. I have it there as a distinct reminder, but you can probably tell, and we spoke about this earlier, that I want to talk about this, Tony, because I want to be transparent with people. Is that I'm still suffering issues from this in regards to my eye, which is not blinking, and the side of my face that is tingling. And I'm still undergoing tests to see what is wrong in my situation.
Yeah, and I think that is a good reminder that life happens and we have to roll with it, but that planning is essential exactly for that reason, that we don't know what's going to happen. If we knew what was going to happen, then maybe we would need to plan. We'd need to prepare, which is the whole point of this podcast and the Get Ready movement is to urge people to get ready, and to stay prepared. So, Greg, let's talk about your book. What inspired you to write Do Not Ignore Your Mortality?
Well, it was really frustration, Tony. I noticed in the funeral industry that I worked in for about 14 years that so many families were just poorly prepared compared to the smaller number of families where it was obvious. And they would tell us as funeral directors that, grandma was so prepared, she had her funeral paid for and all planned, and those types of comments led to a much better outcome for the survivors. But in the vast majority of cases, there was really no planning like that at all. And then after about 14 years, I shifted and I wanted to work at something a little more lively. So I became a financial advisor. And that's where I developed a strong interest in estate planning and those sorts of things. But I found the same type of hesitancy in that field too, as I'm sure you do, that many people were far more interested in talking to me about how their investments were doing as opposed to something that could derail a good retirement, such as a brain tumor or a heart attack or some sort of critical illness or worse, a death.
Yeah, and it's something that I've advocated for, and people who watch and listen to this podcast episode have heard me talk especially about disability insurance, which I think is the most overlooked financial services and product, which everybody needs. If you are dependent upon your income, you need disability insurance. And then you bring up these other types of coverages that people don't even think about, critical illness insurance and all these things is the whole reason you're buying these things is because there is the possibility that they could happen. And, we think of insuring our car because there's a possibility of getting in a car accident or insuring our home. But in my mind, we're not insuring our most valuable asset, which is our income. And if we don't have an income, we don't have a retirement plan. And so, like with something like you're going through, is that takes time out of your day to have those tests. That's not free time that's magically popping up from somewhere for you to do those tests, to do all the different things that I'm sure your doctors are urging you to do. And so it is very important to address those issues.
Yes, I firmly agree with you, Tony. And I've sold disability insurance when I worked in that role as a financial advisor for years, and I firmly agree with you. Insuring and protecting our greatest asset is vital. But I also want your audience to know, and I think I had mentioned this to you previously, Tony, that on the very day of my brain surgery, when the surgeon went in to remove most of this non-cancerous tumor between my ears, on that very day, after many back and forth conversations with the insurance company, they paid me $90,000 tax-free right into my bank account because years earlier I had bought good quality critical illness insurance at the recommendation of my mentor in the financial services industry. And ironically, I had bought a rider on that critical illness insurance policy, Tony, for non-cancerous brain tumors.
Wow.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, and that just goes back to the earlier point. We don't know what's going to happen. And that's, when you're planning is you have to plan for all kinds of possible outcomes. I mean, you can't plan for everything. However, you can prepare for, different possibilities. So, Greg, one of the things that you talk about is communication. And you've dealt with hundreds, if not thousands of families, is why is communication essential?
Well, it's basically the starting point of so many other things. It takes communication with our advisors, our financial advisor, and our lawyer, and our accountant, and our spouse, and so many other people within our circle to really get things moving in the right direction. But if we're not willing to talk about these sorts of things, and I totally get it that many people don't want to talk about bad things happening or dying. And some people I think, Tony, are just simply superstitious. That some people feel that if they talk about these things, that they're going to somehow attract them into their life. Well, I don't think that that's true at all. I've met all kinds of people that work in the funeral industry, and I don't think any of them would ever believe that either. Otherwise, they wouldn't be working in it. But I truly do think that, as you said, we have to be prepared. And there are so many benefits to being prepared and talking about these things and planning. In all of my interviews, Tony, I'm recommending this core message, which I think is the most inspirational way to put it. But I'm recommending that and stressing to people that end of life planning helps reduce the stress of aging. It leaves survivors more financially and emotionally resilient. It leaves them in a place where they are more likely to get along and less likely to contest final wishes. It naturally results in more meaningful legacies. It often helps charities because of the immense tax planning benefits of planned giving. It always takes pressure off the courts from otherwise needing to be involved in unorganized estates, and all these things help bolster the economy.
Well, that's quite the list, and I agree with you completely. So I think, that one of the things you point out is that end of life planning is a gift for your loved ones. And, so maybe that's a good question to address is why is end of life planning a gift for your loved ones?
Well, it's just such a special way to leave those that we care about most in the best possible position. Let me put it another way, Tony. We all want what is best for our children. I think that's pretty well a given for most of us. But aside from leaving our loved ones with financial security, in my opinion, the next best thing that we can do for those that we love the most is to have our final affairs in order. And I truly do believe that is the ultimate gift of love.
I completely agree. You hear that so often is like, mom and dad didn't have anything prepared, or I don't know what to do, and the siblings fight. And
Yeah.
that is unfortunately so sad is that when somebody passes away, that sibling conflict is almost inevitable when there hasn't been any planning. Um, in my experience from either personal situations or hearing it from clients or whatever, is that conflict is almost inevitable. I mean, would you agree without planning?
Well, to a large degree, yes. And in mid-December, my father decided to die. He was 90 years of old, 90 years of age, Tony, and I don't think I had mentioned this to you previously, but he was 90 years of age and going through all kinds of health issues. And he had cancer throughout his body. He was in a lot of pain, and he started talking to my sister and I about the MAID program, medical assistance in dying, which surprised us a little bit. But then again, it didn't surprise me to a large degree because I've seen this happen a number of times. I've actually got the card here for a cousin of mine that died a year prior because he had had a number of strokes. If stroke was adamant, as my father was, that both of them felt that they did not want to be forced to live in a long-term care facility, basically with a very poor quality of life, such as in a diaper and having to be moved from a bed to a wheelchair and back to a bed. My cousin said to me, Greg, this is no way to live. And then he got thinking about this as well. But in my father's case, just back in December, he said, Greg, I'm just ready to go. I'm everything is becoming a major challenge. I'm in more pain all the time. I've been researching this, and I did some research for him too. And then it all happened very quickly. But it's I can see why more and more people are choosing assisted voluntary death because it is such a very peaceful way to die.
Yeah, I know some people maybe for religious reasons or cultural reasons may not be in line with this, and I'm not recommending or not recommending this, but I do get that it is a good option for some people if you reach a point where, as you say, life is not, your quality of life is so poor. And I think that's a judgment that we all have to make for ourselves is, what that means. And we have to support our loved ones because it can be hard. I have a friend whose father has been just one thing after another, and his quality of life is just poor, but it's been dragging on for years, and it's very hard on everybody involved. So, sometimes there are those situations where, and I guess we shouldn't go too into this, but that I think that, those are things to consider. Um, so Greg, you're a death doula. Can you tell us what is a death doula?
Well, I've been trained at Tony as a hospice volunteer, and I've been around death, all aspects, many aspects of it for quite a number of years throughout my career. I'm still a licensed funeral director today, although I'm not working actively in that industry. I still stay close to it to a degree. But because I'm a hospice volunteer, I do consider myself a death doula. And a death doula is similar to a birth doula who is simply helping during that time of whether it be a birth or a death. And as a hospice volunteer, that's basically what we're doing is we're acting as a death doula to help people who are getting closer to that point of dying.
So just out of curiosity, what is a hospice volunteer? I mean, how do you, I mean, because you're helping the person adjust is, how does that go? Because that's got to be, I'm sure there's some people who are accepting it and there are other people who are not accepting. I mean, how do you start to help someone accept it? Because once they're in hospice, it's, as I understand it, inevitable.
Well, yes, to a large degree, that's very true. Although the last fella that I was basically helping, he was in a hospital here in this area, and I would go visit him every Tuesday evening for an hour and a half or so, and we would just talk, and we became close friends actually, and we both really enjoyed getting together. And then his health got better, and he was transferred home and he wanted me to help write his final memoir because he knew he was dying. He had cancer. He just didn't know when, because the doctors and such weren't really being clear with him, and perhaps they didn't know. But we were jokingly telling him that we could call the title of his little memoir "How I Survived Hospice" because he actually came back home again. And I continued to meet with him, and we just talked, and I helped him write his final memoir, which he was very appreciative of. But as a hospice volunteer, that could be done helping in a hospice, or it could be done at the person's home. Basically, we just talk with the patient and get to know them, but we're not allowed to pass them pills or anything like that. It's a very delicate situation, but we also are there to give the family a bit of a break too.
Yeah, and I can imagine because it is tough on everyone involved in the family. And, it sounds like, essentially your role is to support people and to be someone that they can talk to as they go through this.
Yes, exactly. And I've been in that type of role, especially as I worked as a funeral director. So I'm quite familiar with that aspect of end of life situations.
Yeah, so, Greg, to start to wrap up, one of the things you've talked about is the death positive movement. What is the death positive movement?
Well, it's really just a movement, Tony, that has been taking place over the last number of decades, actually. But now I find it's coming up to a higher level all the time. I don't know about you, but my wife is really a big TikTok fan, and she's always watching TikTok and saying, "Greg, look at this video, how funny it is," and it is the videos are very entertaining, quite often. But I find even on that type of platform and other platforms too, and even on television series and such, there's more of an openness to talk about death and end of life issues, even to the point where people who are dying are actually documenting their journey.
Well, that's incredible. So is this a formal movement or is this just something that you're promoting or?
Well, I've heard other people call it the death positive movement. I wouldn't say it's overly formal, but it is something that is slowly gaining attention and gaining more traction all the time, I would say.
So it's like just having a positive mindset around the death process, I guess.
Well, yeah, well, that's right, and that core message that I had mentioned to you earlier, Tony, that has allowed that at least partially has allowed me to attract over 14,000 followers on LinkedIn is really just because I'm regularly on that platform, reaching out to people who I think would resonate with this type of preparedness message from the funeral and medical and financial and legal industries, etc. But as I said, I don't think anyone can really dispute those points that I had mentioned earlier, that end of life planning leads to all kinds of benefits, especially greater resilience for those that we love and care about.
Yeah, I agree with that. Resilience is so important. That's what preparedness is about, is building resilience, or having the ability to be resilient because you have a plan in place. And
Yes.
that's a key component of resilience. So, Greg, to wrap up, I have what's called the Get Ready Hot Take Trio, and these are three quick questions I ask all of my guests. The first one is, what's one myth you're trying to break about end of life planning?
That end of life planning is to be done at the end of life. And that's really baloney. I've worked as a supervisor, Tony, at one of the largest mortuaries in Canada. And this organization, in one way or another, deals with over 100 deaths each and every day. And I've worked on the front lines of death care with forensics and medical staff and police, etc., and seen things that would curl most people's hair, except yours. You don't have much of it.
Haven't been told that before, but
No,
okay.
I'm just joking with you, Tony. But I'm just saying that I have seen things that most people have not, and death happens at every age. I've seen many situations where young people have died, and we don't know what's around the corner, but it's vitally important that we all have a will and a medical directive, and we lean into these things sooner rather than later, because we just don't know what's ahead of us, regardless of our age.
That is true. We don't know what's ahead of us. That's a great point, and I think that gets back to the whole thing: is planning is important. So, Greg, let's get out the time machine for a minute. If you could go back in time, knowing what you know now about end of life planning, what advice would you give your younger self?
Well, that's the first thing that I think of. So much in our lives revolves around money, doesn't it? And when I had mentioned earlier that my critical illness insurance policy paid me $90,000, that's very true. $90,000 tax free because it's paid out as an insurance benefit, which is tax free. It's an awesome um, advantage. But I wish I had have had more of it.
Yeah, that is something, I've heard coming from the insurance field, is that a lot of people have said, boy, I wish I'd had more insurance. But you never know. You do the planning that you do, and but that is something to think about for people who are thinking about their insurance planning. Think about what you're really going to need, and what's going to make your plan whole. So, Greg, to wrap up, the last question is, what's your number one tip for changing the way we think about end of life planning?
Well, I think one specific tip that you will relate to, Tony, in regards to just planning in general, is the fact that it is so vitally important to set up our insurance planning, whether there's a gap in coverage regarding something that may happen, whether we die or whether we're disabled or whatever. It's vitally important to set up these insurance plans when you're healthy and you can qualify for them. Right now, I couldn't buy any insurance if I wanted to, because I'm undergoing all these tests, and any insurance company underwriter would say, "Whoa, this guy's a little too risky for us at this point." They would want a long period of time of health stability before they would even consider me. So getting it when you're young is vitally important, and it's a whole lot cheaper.
Definitely. And you probably need it when you're young. I mean, that's the other point, is to, with any preparedness, is to prepare before you need it. So that's great advice. So, Greg, where can people learn more about you, your work, and pick up a copy of Do Not Ignore Your Mortality?
Well, the easiest place, Tony, is through my website. Do not ignore your mortality.com is the website name. And there are links peppered all through that website that would take people to Amazon or Barnes and Noble or Apple. It's available in physical, ebook, and audiobook format too. And if people listening to this want to connect with me, they can also do that through my website. I welcome any inquiries, and I'm also looking to do whatever I can to help spread this message of preparedness.
Fantastic. And for everybody watching, listening, as always, if you have access to the show notes, the links will be in the show notes. So you can go there to find these links. Greg, thanks for joining us on Get Ready Before Life Happens.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, as always, for tuning in to this episode of Get Ready Before Life Happens. If you learned something today to change the way you think about planning, please be sure to subscribe and to share with a friend. You can also go to my website at tonystewart.com to join the Get Ready movement and get access to my newsletter and free resources. Until next time, let's change the way we think about money.